Does she have authority to say the things that she did? Does she have authority to impose any of these mandates? Because as you've mentioned, the university does not have a policy for mask, right? So therefore, the Ontario Reopening Act supersedes anything that the faculty says, or anything that the professor would really say, because there is no official policy, right? So tell me a little bit about that, the legality of the situation, if whether or not she was in the right or the wrong.
Yeah. Well, in regards to the mask, definitely she was wrong, because the Reopening Ontario Act allows for exemptions, and I knew that, and I had studied everything I could find on masks according to the Government of Ontario before I went into that class and had this conversation. Because the first day that I showed up to class, I was prepared for confrontation regarding the fact that I hadn't disclosed my vaccination status. That was the battle I was expecting to have. But it ended up being the fact that I wasn't wearing a mask. And that I was not really prepared for on the first day, but I held my ground. So I went in prepared. I had the Reopening Ontario Act with me. I had whatever the act was that, I had the act that the university cites as its reasoning for why everyone has to wear a mask, which does not even talk about masks in the entire regulation. And that's what I read to the professor in the video. And yeah, there's no mention of masks. So in that sense, she was definitely wrong. Yes, I was violating the university policy because you have to disclose your vaccination status in order to come to campus, but non-compliance is the way to fight against all of the wrong that's happening in society. So I'm not going to comply with the university's ridiculous policy that they want my personal medical information in order to come to school that I have paid for. So I wasn't going to follow that policy. And if they had a mask policy that didn't allow for exemptions, I don't think that would be legal, because it would be above the Reopening Ontario Act. And so again, I still would not be following that policy. I'm exempt.
Right. Yeah, so it's good that you brought that up, because what it really means to be a good citizen is you're going to go vote, and you're going to follow or not follow certain rules, right? So if the policies do make sense, and the policies are good for your own health, the individual's health, and your family's health, then yes, obviously you're going to have to abide, you're going to have to follow it. However, when society is discriminating against a certain individuals for the good of the public, that is when there's something wrong, because that does not happen in Western society. And therefore, as Canadian citizens and as good citizens, it is our responsibility to ignore unjust rules, because they are segregating society into and dividing us, right? So it's good that you brought that up, because whether or not you're in the right or wrong, that's not part of the big question here. The big question is testing out whether these policies are correct, because of course they're segregating a certain class of people.
Yeah, and that's exactly what we see in the video. It's the prof telling me that I can't be in the classroom because I can't wear a mask. She also did ask about my vaccination status, and I'm not going to answer that question. No one knows. I'm not disclosing that information. It's personal, private medical information. It's none of the university's business. It's not my professor's business, especially to ask that in front of the entire class. I was like, do you really expect me to answer in front of like 30 people? No. And she was like, oh yeah, of course. I didn't expect you to answer that question.
Yeah, the language she used, I mean, she implied that she already knows the answer to what you're going to say.
Well, of course she's going to assume. I'm the dissenter in the room. Yeah.
And another thing she assumes is that you're ill and you're spreading the disease, even though you told her, I'm not a threat to you because I am healthy. I feel well. I'm not a threat to you. And she said, you don't know that.
Yeah.
And I mean, going by that, it is just kind of the narrative is based on facts or scientific facts that are brought up by authorities that are not proven. They were never shown the data, and they're using those as justification to discriminate against you. Because I mean, of course, if you're not symptomatic, you're not going to be spreading disease. And you told her, I'm not a threat. And of course, this shows that you're not a threat, because you went in the day before that and it was no problem about the mask, because you talked about it, and she still did the class, right? So she was not threatened at that time, but now all of a sudden she's trying to teach a lesson to you, and that you're a threat to society. So I thought that was a pretty bad way to go for her, especially if she did not go along her standards in the first class.
Yeah.
So
Well, I mean,
that's
what's her standard?
right.
Something that the university isn't going to back up, something the government isn't going to back up.
Mhm.
It was her personal opinion,
Yeah.
or it was her misinterpreted idea of what the school's policy was, because the school does not have a mask policy. But the interesting thing is too, like, if I'm such a threat to society for not wearing a mask, even though I'm not sick, why was I allowed to go back to class then? Because she did call security and they asked to talk to me out in the hall, and I did. And I also have that recorded. And they told me at the end of that discussion that I could go back to class. They were like, good for you standing up for your rights. This is still Canada. You can do that here. Yet they also seemed to think that the school had a no mask exemption policy. So I don't know where they're getting this idea from. It doesn't exist. And then in my correspondence afterwards with the dean, I called him out on violating the Ontario Reopening Act. And when I said that, he backed off of the mask issue. And since then, I haven't had any issues with being on campus